Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And I've just come across a really interesting document produced by the Institute of Race Relations in South Africa. And I'll attach a link to the PDF directly below this video so you can actually read the whole thing. It's a long document, but it says in the introduction, very, very concerning, the 10-year lockdown with worse still to come. And it says, not just a COVID-19 lockdown. South Africa's stringent COVID-19 lockdown has largely been lifted with a shift from level 4 to level 3 on the 1st of June. Under level 3, most businesses are now allowed to operate, albeit subject to strict social distancing and hygiene conditions. However, the country has also been in an unacknowledged policy lockdown for at least the last 10 years. This is especially so since Jacob Zuma came to power in 2009 and began implementing radical economic transformation, known as RET, Radical Economic Transformation. Policies aimed at changing the ownership, control, and very structure of the economy. Mr. Zuma was helped to power by the South African Communist Party, precisely because, unlike President Thabo Mbeki, he had pledged his support for RET. Contrary to widespread belief, RET policies have continued under President Cyril Ramaphosa, whose rise to power was also facilitated by the South African Communist Party, and whose New Dawn pledges have thus far proved meaningless. If anything, the president's reform rhetoric has simply provided cover for major additional RET policies implemented under his watch. Mr. Ramaphosa has also recently made it clear that radical economic transformation must now underpin the reconstruction of the economy, and he's talking about post-COVID-19 lockdown. In the past decade, the private sector has been subject to even more onerous, costly, and damaging regulation. Coercive labor laws have been made more rigid. Black economic empowerment, BEE, goalposts have been ratcheted up, with still more damaging effects. Property rights have been steadily eroded to the point where the Constitution is now to be amended to allow expropriation without compensation, or EWC, nationalization by another name. The rigor of this 10-year policy lockdown remains as yet largely unrecognized. However, by the time the COVID-19 lockdown started in March, the impact of the policy lockdown was clearly visible. Labor law rigidities and a national minimum wage had continued to deter employment and price the unskilled out of jobs, adding to social instability. Business autonomy and operational efficiency were being steadily whittled away by escalating employment equity and BEE rules. Most property owners, both individual and corporate, faced a growing risk of expropriation without compensation. Pressure for prescribed asset requirements for pension funds was increasing. So too were demands for a wealth tax, stricter exchange controls, and a money printing mandate for the South African Reserve Bank, or SARB. The 10-year policy lockdown had thus severely hobbled the private sector before the COVID-19 pandemic began, with the economy already in a technical recession. Since then, more than 9 weeks of hard lockdowns have crippled the economy and pushed it down onto its knees. GDP, warns Business for South Africa, could contract by between 10 and 17% this year. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, sees the budget deficit reaching 13.3% this year, with public debt as a ratio of GDP rising to 86% in 2021. Add in the state's other liabilities, such as its guarantees of Eskom debt and overall public debt, it looks to increase to 110% of GDP by 2023. Around 100,000 businesses barred from normal operations under the lockdown could go bankrupt or give up the struggle to survive. The unemployment rate is expected to rise to 50%, as Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, said in late May. The consumer spending that has long contributed some 60% to GDP will be sharply reduced. Tax revenues will go down this year by a projected 285 billion rand, worsening the 370 billion rand deficit anticipated in the February 2020 budget. But public spending on COVID-19 relief for lost income, larger social grants, additional bailouts for distressed state-owned enterprises, and increased interest payments will nevertheless have to go sharply up. The economic devastation from the COVID-19 lockdown will be more severe and prolonged in South Africa than in other countries where lockdowns have also been deployed. This is largely because the 10-year policy lockdown already in place had brought so many firms and individuals to the brink. The COVID-19 crisis then pushed them over the edge, while the pre-existing damage will make it harder to climb back. The COVID-19 lockdown has, of course, been highly visible to all, but the policy lockdown that has held the country in an iron grasp for at least the last decade is not so easy to discern. That makes the policy lockdown more difficult to understand and far harder to end. Understanding the policy lockdown of the last 10 years. In 1994, South Africa was the undisputed economic powerhouse of the African continent, with the biggest economy, the best infrastructure, the most sophisticated financial institutions, the most liquid market, and a vibrant private sector, contributing 70% to GDP and well equipped to speed up growth and expand prosperity. The country still has many of these strengths, but its economy has performed way below its potential since 1994 and increasingly badly over the past 10 years. Why has this happened? Many factors have played a part, from a persistent skills deficit to aging infrastructure, increased governmental inefficiency and corruption, and costly and unreliable electricity supplies. However, by far the most important reason for the growing malaise lies in the policies adopted by the ANC government since the political transition. Many commentators criticize ANC policies as too uncertain, meaning either that their content is too vague or that delays in adopting proposed changes are too long. Others assert that our economic policies are good, but the ANC fails adequately to implement them. Both these views are incorrect. The real problem is that many bad policies have been introduced, that these bad policies have been tightened up and made more damaging over time, and that their implementation, often achieved with the help of business, has generally been far too effective for the country's good. These bad policies have their roots in the National Democratic Revolution. Don't forget that term, National Democratic Revolution, or NDR, to which the ANC and its communist allies have been committed since the 1960s. The National Democratic Revolution aims to shift South Africa from a predominantly capitalist society to a socialist and ultimately a communist one. This is to be done by slow and incremental steps and over a period of some 40 years. Implementation began in 1994 and is now well advanced, particularly under the rubric of the radical economic transformation that Mr. Zuma started to popularize and which Mr. Ramaphosa is now taking further. The South African Communist Party has long used its dominance over the ANC to set the National Democratic Revolution agenda for the ruling party and continues to do so. The National Democratic revolution goals are openly acknowledged in both the South African Communist Party and ANC policy and strategy documents, while the ANC regularly recommits itself to the National Democratic Revolution at its 5-yearly national conferences. But most South Africans have little or no knowledge of the National Democratic Revolution, largely because most commentators persist in ignoring or poo-pooing it. The National Democratic Revolution is nevertheless the lodestar of the ANC South African Communist Party alliance, and the glue that holds the competing factions in the ANC together. The South African Communist Party faction, to which Mr. Ramaphosa belongs, arguably wants it primarily for more purist ideological reasons. The state capture faction sees personal benefit in increased state power and expanded opportunities for self-enrichment. The two sides differ on tactics, timing, and the degree of looting to be tolerated, but the National Democratic Revolution remains a guiding objective on which both fundamentally agree. National Democratic Revolution interventions have been playing out in some 20 spheres since the ANC took power, making the full story of its implementation too long and complex to be captured here. One general point can, however, be made. A transition to socialism would be far more difficult to achieve if South Africa's capitalist economy was thriving, if unemployment was low, and if most people's incomes and living standards were rising. A shift to socialism is far more likely to occur when joblessness and inequality are high, and most people are becoming poorer. Counterintuitive as it may seem, National Democratic Revolution interventions are thus generally aimed at deterring investment, limiting growth, and adding to unemployment. In line with the overall socialist objective, many National Democratic Revolution policies also seek to increase dependency on the government, bring business under ever greater government control, and expand state ownership over land and other vital means of production. Few National Democratic Revolution interventions can be described in this brief overview. However, to understand the National Democratic Revolution thinking more fully, and so gain more insight into what has been planned, it is instructive to outline what has been done in 3 vital spheres: labour, BEE, and property rights. And then it goes on to actually go through these different policies. Now, I'm going to leave it at that, but it's a very, very insightful document by the Institute of Race Relations. As I said, the link to the complete document is directly below this video in the description. Please download it, read it, and understand how the ANC are screwing you over. This is not happening because of incompetence. This is a strategy that's been incorporated by the ANC through the South African Communist Party and the National Democratic Revolution, which is not some conspiracy theory. It's very, very real. And it's behind the basis of everything that is happening to the economy in South Africa right now. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it at that. Please download this document. As I say, the link is directly below this video in the description. It'll make your hair stand on end. Please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Ring the bell for the updates. Please like this video. Please share this video. And above all, please stay safe.